Well, hello everybody, and welcome to our Coaching Café for this week, Competent or Not Yet Competent, Coaching Through the Eyes of the Assessor. My name is Brigitte Calvert and I am a part of the Open Door coaching group, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation, if not a compact conversation with you over the next half an hour around what those coaching conversations look like when they're competent, but also what they look like when they're not yet competent. So I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you about that. I really welcome you to add to the chat box if you have questions or comments, and welcome. So I'm going to start. You might, for those who know me, might know I'm technologically challenged at the best of times sometimes, so bear with me. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we meet today and their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities of Australia. We pay our respects to them and to their elders, past, present and emerging. So let's have a look at our agenda for today. What's the difference between a competent coaching recording and not yet competent? What makes an assessor's heart sing and what makes it sink? Today, in our time together, I want to create that sense of community. I want us to create those shared learning experiences and have those thought-provoking conversations. So please feel free, as I say, to add to the chat box any thoughts or comments or questions as we progress. And I'll also put up the CCEU certificate at the end of our session today. You do need to stay online for the whole 30 minutes to be able to access that. So let's have a look at competent. So I'm just going to have a look if I can see the chat box here as well. So I'm guessing it'll come up for me if people have something to say. So I don't quite see it at this point, but that's okay. Please, I'm sure it'll pop up if you have something to say. So competent, establishing the coaching agreement, that clear goal, that overall goal, and also the goal for this conversation. So what do I mean by that, establishing the coaching agreement? Well, it's really about partnering with the client and certainly any possible or relevant stakeholders to create those clear agreements about the coaching relationship, the coaching plans or goals. And it's about establishing agreements for not only that overall coaching engagement, that bigger picture, but also those agreements for each coaching session. So from a coaching conversation or a coaching recording perspective, you may not necessarily submit a recording that talks about the overall goal necessarily in much detail, but more so the goal for the conversation that you're having today, with potential linking to that bigger overall goal as well. So establishing the coaching agreements are a really important part of that coaching conversation process. Trust and rapport. So we're establishing the coaching agreement, we're getting clear around the goal, the overall picture, and also the desired outcome for the coaching conversation that we're having right now. And we're also wanting to build that trust and rapport with our coachee. And so from an assessor's perspective, how do I know? How do I know that that's what's happening? Well, we're looking at for the idea of partnering with the client to create that safe and supportive environment that, creates the space for the coachee or the client to share. It's about maintaining a relationship that demonstrates that mutual respect and trust. So how do we know? Well, you're accepting of what the coachee or the client is telling you. You are acknowledging what they're saying. If we're accepting the client, we're accepting their environment, their experiences, their values or their beliefs, as an example. If we're acknowledging the client, we're acknowledging perhaps their talents or their strengths. We're acknowledging their insights. We're acknowledging the work that they're doing in the process of that coaching conversation. We're also respecting them. So we're respecting perhaps their identity, their perceptions, their behavioural styles, as an example. So we're showing support, we're showing empathy. We're also demonstrating openness and transparency. So, you know, as an example, it might be that you're thinking about a particular question that you want to ask. And so you're taking a moment to reflect that to your client in terms of, I'm taking a moment to think about the best question to ask you, just as an example. So really building that trust and rapport so that your client has that opportunity in that space to really think and reflect and share what they're feeling. Maintaining presence. So competency will also be demonstrated through maintaining presence, that, you know, being 100% focused and curious about your client and who they are and what they bring to the conversation. So we're aligning our emotions with the client. You know, we're being empathetic, but we're not getting drawn into the story as such. We're not getting sucked into that story. We're maintaining those boundaries, those clear boundaries, so that we are able to serve that client in the best possible way. We're allowing space for silence. We're allowing space for reflection. I might just get someone to pop in the chat box that you can hear me as well, so that just to make sure, because I'm not seeing any chat happening. So if some, oh great, terrific, thank you. Oh, fantastic, thanks so much, that's really helpful. Thank you, excellent. So, okay, so moving on, staying out of the space and listening. This is, you know, obviously really important when we're having our coaching conversations. You know, we live in a world where we're so busy, it's almost like we're on that treadmill and we keep going and we're juggling. And so having the opportunity to be in that coaching conversation where we're allowed that space and our coach is staying out of that space and listening. So, you know, how do we know from an assessor perspective or someone listening to the conversation, you know, the coach is focusing on what the client is saying, but also what they're not saying as well, to fully understand what's being said by the client. And that might show up as non-verbal cues, as an example. It might be something that you catch, something that you notice, a non-verbal cue, something to do with body language or potentially tone of voice or change of pace or something, an inflection that highlights potentially a misalignment. So it's being really aware of that and listening for that. It's also demonstrating being able to reflect and summarise to make sure that you're clear around what the client is saying and also understanding what the client is saying. Non-judgmental, of course, that's a really important part of the coaching process. So we acknowledge, of course, that the client is responsible for their own choices and that we are not judging those choices. Again, it's another example of staying out of the space. You know, we're focusing on the client. We're not focusing on ourselves or recognising, for example, a similar situation. So as the coach, it's about staying out of that space and not jumping into, oh, I know what you mean. You know, this is what happened to me and I was in a similar situation, you know, which we might do with a friend over coffee. If we're wanting to empathise or what have you, we might do that. You know, we're human beings and we get into a conversation and we can jump into the space and we can speak over the top of each other, or we might judge certain things, you know, generally speaking. When we're putting on our coaching hat, of course, it's very different. We really need to stay out of that space and understand that the client is in charge here and the client is in charge of their own environment, their own space, their own thinking, and we're simply here to facilitate that process. Excuse me. Asking questions with a genuine curiosity and purpose. I talk about this a lot. You know, so we want to make sure that we're using tools and techniques that facilitate client insight and learning, if you like. So we're asking those curious, questions, mostly open questions, the who, what, where, when, how questions, those open questions. And we're also asking questions with intention, with purpose. So is the question I'm going to ask going to support this person to move from this spot to this spot? Am I supporting that person to move forward toward where they want to be? Or am I asking a question for the sake of wanting to know more about the content or more about the detail of what's happening? I might be really interested, but that's me getting stuck into that space and wanting to know more for myself, potentially because I'm interested. So when we're in that coaching space, we want to be mindful that the questions that we're asking are supporting that person to move forward toward where they want to be. That genuine curiosity and asking questions with purpose and intention. We're also asking one question at a time. Sometimes when we're wanting to design the right question, we can talk aloud or talk as we think, and essentially we might stack a question if we're wanting to rephrase that question, as an example. So taking a moment to really think or really consider that question that you would like to ask, and ask that one question, and leaving the space for the response. You might need to redesign that question, potentially. However, ask it once, see how it lands, and move on to the next question when appropriate. And as I mentioned, mostly open questions. Closed questions are valuable when we want to really nail someone to commitment. There are places for closed questions, but we want to be making sure that we're asking mostly those open questions to really allow that person to stretch their thinking and to think and reflect independently, because those are the sorts of questions that we ask when we're curious about something, those open questions to elicit information that's relevant to the coachee or the client. We also understand that the client, the coachee, finds their own answers. So we trust that they have those answers within them. And if they don't think they have the answers within them, we trust that they can find a way of finding those answers for themselves, rather than me placing onto that person my ideas about what the right answer could be. So going in with that belief and that trust, this person can find the answers. And as coaches, we believe that. Okay, so those are the ideas around competency. So just to recap, establishing the coaching agreement, making sure that we're clear around that overall goal for the coaching process, that coaching relationship or engagement, as well as the desired outcome or the goal for that individual conversation as well. So by the time someone walks away from that conversation, they have what they want, which was agreed upon at the start of that session. Building trust and rapport, maintaining presence and being 100% focused and curious about the client. Staying out of the space, really important, and listening to what the client is saying. Making sure that we are non-judgmental and that we're asking questions with genuine curiosity because we don't have the answer for that person, and questions with purpose that is going to intending to move that person toward where they want to go. Asking one question at a time, making sure that we're asking mostly those open questions, who, what, where, when, and how, and that they are finding their own answers. And we trust that they can do that. So I'm wondering at this point, just in terms of that area of competency, are there any questions or thoughts or comments that you'd like to share at this point? All right, terrific. Shay, I can see you have raised your hand there. Now it's my challenge to work out how to, let's have a look. Okay, so Shay, you've raised your hand. I'm wondering if you could put something in the chat box there, if you have a question or a thought or a comment. I hope I'm in the right spot. I'm just in the chat box. Shay, you wanting to add something? Great, thank you. Yeah, staying out of the space is probably the toughest part with coaching. And you're absolutely right. It can be really challenging, especially when, you know, as I say, in our everyday lives, we might do that differently. As human beings, we can tend to, especially with friends or family or, you know, people we're familiar with, we can jump into the space and we can, you know, we can give our opinion, or we might say, oh, you know, what are you doing it like that for? Or I would do it like this, or this is what I think you should do. And these sorts of things that we might do. And certainly from a coaching perspective, we need to rid ourselves of that. And we need to practice so we become more and more in tune with trusting that that person has the answer for themselves, regardless of whether we're coaching or not, actually. The more and more we can practice that, the easier it becomes. As a coach, we go in believing and trusting that that person has the answers within them. The minute that I think to offer my opinion or give advice, I am taking away the opportunity for that person to think for themselves. I'm taking away that opportunity for that person to grow or to expand their own thinking. Yes, so I hope that helps. It's just one of those things that it's practice all the time, Shay. It is making sure that we are asking those open questions and staying out of the space. It does take some practice, but certainly being able to give yourself something to practice every day. Set yourself a challenge every day so it becomes part of how you operate, how you work. And thank you, Sebastian. So building relationships, and for each coaching conversation, how do these ideas relate to the overall coaching plan? Yeah, absolutely. So we want to make sure that we're building rapport and building those relationships, especially when we're in long-term relationships with coachees. You know, if we've got a coaching block of, you know, 4 or 8 or 12, 10 coaching sessions, depending on what that overall coaching plan looks like, and making sure that we're able to build on that relationship, making sure that that coachee or that client starts to really trust the relationship, because the more they trust that relationship, of course, the more that they give that opportunity 100%. And that's what we're looking to achieve, isn't it? That's what we want for our clients. You know, what's my intention for you? My intention for you is to support you to build on the strengths that you have, to make the changes that you're looking to achieve. And so by supporting that relationship, that trust and rapport, and building on that relationship, my relationship with you as the client is supporting that process for that person to grow. I hope that answers the question, Sebastian. Certainly add something more if you'd like to, if I haven't. The usual comments we habitually make when we're conversing. Yeah, absolutely, Shay, for sure. And this is where our mindfulness comes into that, being conscious and aware of what's coming out of our mouths when we're coaching. And, you know, that can take some time to build on that practice. You know, it's like anything. You know, we like our comfort zones, don't we? We're human. We like our comfort zones and we're comfortable in what we know. But we ourselves need to take ourselves out and stretch ourselves beyond that comfort zone to try something different. And the more and more we practice it, the more familiar we become. And of course, we start to stretch those comfort zones. Stay out of the content. Yeah, like we do with family and friends, and focus on the who of the person. Yes, thanks, Angela. It's a different intent for the conversation. Absolutely. Our intention for our coaching conversations are quite different to potentially the conversations we might have with friends and family. So we're bringing a different toolkit, we're wearing a different hat. The intention for this conversation can be quite different. Yeah, absolutely, thank you. What if the person's solution could cause harm to others or be inconsistent with laws or organisational policy? Yeah, that's a really great question, of course. So we're not going to buy into the coach or the client causing harm to other people, and certainly there's reporting for that sort of thing, and we might want to highlight that, of course, at the start of our coaching relationship with the person in terms of the confidentiality rules. And what is kept confidential, but certainly in the event that someone was to cause harm to themselves or to others, or be inconsistent with laws or organisational policy, that there is a process in place for that. Okay, well done, everyone. Thanks for your comments. So let's have a look at not yet competent. If we have no coaching agreement established for a formal coaching session, we want to make sure we know where we're going with our coaching sessions. We want to make sure that there's an agreement in place so that there's clarity around what that person is wanting to achieve. It might include, of course, that sort of formal arrangement in terms of the goals, the overall goals of the conversation, how many coaching sessions are taking place, when they're going to take place and how. Telling, mentoring or advising. Sure, we might do this in our everyday lives, but we're certainly not going to do this when we're coaching. So telling, mentoring or advising, there is no place for that when we're coaching. Now, mentoring or advising, sure, there's value, obviously, in those skills, most certainly, not when we're coaching, because coaching is not mentoring. There's a clear difference between what coaching is and what mentoring is. They may both be part of your toolkit, but when we're coaching, we're not doing the other. We're not yet competent if we're judging or we're giving our opinion. So in the coaching space, we're staying out of that space. We are not judging, we are not giving our opinions. So that's something we don't want to hear when we're listening to recordings. Getting stuck in the story, as we mentioned before, if we get sucked into the story, it might be really interesting to hear about the story, but how are we serving that person in the best possible way? When we're coaching them, our intention is to support that person, facilitate their insights and learnings to help them move toward where they want to be. That is our role as the coach. Leading questions. So, do you think you could try this? Have you thought about trying that? What about if you did this? Do you think that you could try? These sorts of questions are leading a client down a particular path, because what it sounds like is that I think I have the right answer here and I'm going to just pop it in there for you to pick up what I'm really thinking and what I really want you to do. So we really need to make sure that we are asking those open and curious questions. The who, what, where, when and how questions, mostly to be able to support that coachee to find their own solutions rather than us as coaches leading them down pathways that we might want them to go. Stacking questions. I mentioned this earlier, just in a round of asking one question on top of another. Perhaps we didn't quite feel like we got the question right, so we ask another one, or maybe we've got a few questions in our mind, so we ask them all, and then we need the coaching or the client needs to stop and unpack that stack of questions to respond to one at a time. So practice asking one question at a time and waiting for that response. And if the client needs clarity around the question, rephrase the question if you need to. A lot of closed questions. Yeah. So, if the majority of our conversations are closed questions, we're not really going to elicit much information from our clients. We want to be asking mostly those open questions to elicit more information. As I say, closed questions can be really important for commitment. So certainly asking some is okay. I'm just trying to find my cursor here to, there we go. Another question, just mind me put the chat box up. Yep, leading questions that I have heard. So leading questions like, have you thought about doing this? Could you try that? What about if you did this? So could you try that? Those sorts of questions. Could you, have you, did you, what about if you, those sorts of questions. Shay, does that make sense? It's sort of those questions that highlight potentially that I have the answer, and I really want you to, I want you to take that path. I want you to sort of move along the pathway that I'd like you to go. Great. And jumping into the space. So when my client is talking, I'm not talking. When I'm talking and my client starts to talk, I'll stop talking. So I'm staying out of that space to allow that person to think and reflect and share. Oh yes, yeah, terrific. Thanks, Shay. Perfect. Okay. And also when the coach is talking a lot. So we want to make sure that as we progress through our coaching, we're sort of aiming for the client to be talking 80% of the time, and the coach only about 20% of the time. So this will build up as you move through your coaching experience, but really that's what we're aiming for. Okay, so what makes our hearts sink? So holding on to previous beliefs and not allowing the glass to empty. All right, so we're going in with that closed mindset. So always allow new ways to be added to our current coaching toolkits. Mixing mentoring and coaching when taking part in formal conversations. There's no place for mentoring in our formal coaching conversations. Keep them separate. Closed mindset. Lack of awareness in the coaching session. So not being aware of what's going on for your client. Your client might be saying something and you're not picking up on something that they're saying. As an example, it might be what they're saying isn't congruent with their body language. The lack of flexibility to adapt to the coaching session or to the conversation that's happening. Being able to be flexible in our approaches when we're coaching, that we're using our toolkits, but we're flexible with it, depending on what's being presented. Cutting in and jumping into the space. We need to stay out of the space and allow our clients to finish their thinking, their talking, give them that time to reflect and think, because sometimes it's the only time they have that opportunity. And the coach talking too much. Yeah, we want to make sure that the coach is talking less and the client is given more opportunity. Yeah, so thanks, Sebastian. I've always understood that what you're describing as leading questions can be helpful if the person is stuck. It's not so much what is asked, but how it is asked and debriefed. Yeah, look, I hear what you're saying, and I still maintain that leading questions are not the place for coaching. If the person is stuck, finding different sorts of questions, some sideways chunking, some questions to support that person to become unstuck, some reframing questions, some different open questions to shift their thinking rather than us supporting that person to find a particular answer. Coaches telling their own stories. Adding our stories into the space when we're coaching is not appropriate in that coaching space, because that conversation is all about the client, and so we keep our own stories to ourselves and we don't add our own situations into the conversation. Coach choosing when the session ends. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we've asked the client if they're ready to wrap up their session. Is there anything else that's going to make this more complete for you? And finally, what makes the heart sing? Well, that we're demonstrating the foundations of our coaching practice, our skill development. We're practicing our coaching models and tools, and we're applying them appropriately depending on the situation that's in front of us. We go into our coaching sessions with that growth mindset, that coaching mindset. I believe you can. I trust that you have the answer. And if you do get stuck, I trust that you're going to be able to find the way of finding that answer through the great open questions that I ask. I'm going to be curious and flexible in my approach. I'm going to make sure that I'm focused. My effort is focused on you, 100% focused on you while I'm having that conversation. I'm engaged in our conversation. But I'm also, as a coach, practicing my own reflections, making sure that I'm building upon my own skill as well. After coaching sessions, that I'm thinking and reflecting about what went well or what could be improved. That I'm self-aware in that coaching process. I'm aware of the questions I'm asking. I'm aware of the space that I'm offering. That I have a positive self-concept. I'm going in knowing that I can support this person, facilitate this person's learning and their insights. That I'm prepared. I don't go in with a pre-prepared script necessarily. I know that when we're coaching students, we're practicing models and tools, but that we're prepared mentally and emotionally for the coaching conversation, and that we're enjoying the process. So those are the sorts of things that make our hearts sing. I know that we're running a little bit over, so I'm going to start to wrap this up. Look, there's so much we could talk about in terms of the coaching process, competency versus those non-competency. I hope that this overall, an overarching, compact conversation, if you like, has helped to clarify some things. Certainly you're more than welcome to reach out to us if you want to clarify anything further. You can also listen to the Coaching Café podcast as well. And I hope that you enjoy your coaching.